Are you bursting at the seams with plants desperate to get out into their final growing positions? Well, overcrowded scenes like these are very common at this time of year, but the time has come to get this lot planted. Hi, I'm Ben, and I'd love it if you join me as I get on and plant this lot today. In return for your company, I promise all sorts of tips, tricks and tasty tidbits along the way. And with this lot planted, we'll all be set for summer. You know how it is, there are only so many plants you can fit in the space you have available, but you still push your luck anyway. When will we ever learn? Never mind, we'll see how we get on planting the main beds and then work out what to do with any excess once it's all planted. We'll be mostly planting warm season crops today, and those are things that go outside after your last frost date. So that's things like tomatoes. I've got 3 different varieties. I've got some beautiful squash or pumpkin plants here. I've got some zucchini or courgettes, most of which I planted a few weeks ago. And then I've got these beautiful chili peppers. These will actually go outside later in the summer because they'll get some fresh air then, and that'll help with pest control with all those natural predators outside. So a few words on sowing. You've got 2 tactics here. You can sow as early as possible and then pot on in stages as the plants need it. Now that means you'll be using more potting mix, and of course you'll have to take the time to do so. It's what I did with these tomatoes. They were started off pretty early. I've got the space though, so I thought I might as well do that to get an as early a crop as possible, which is quite useful in my cooler climate. Things like these squash family plants though, like these pumpkins here, well, you can sow those way out into later spring. I still sow them a bit earlier though, and that's because I just want to make double sure. In my temperate climate, the springs can often be quite cool and wet, but conversely rather warm too. You just never know what you're going to get. So if you can, it's worth making an early start, and if those plants do get clobbered by a surprisingly cold snap or pests, you've still got time to make a second sowing. A quick word about acclimatizing your plants before they go outside. Now in this greenhouse here, I had the door open all the time and the windows, and it's pretty warm outside now, so I'm just going to plant them straight out. If you don't have a greenhouse, well, you could use a cold frame, and if you don't have one of those, just pop your plants somewhere sheltered and protected and reasonably warm. You could pop your plants in a kind of box like this, just so it's open to the elements, but it's protected from any winds, and that'll help them sort of make the transition. Leave them outside for increasingly longer periods, just during the day initially, and then overnight on warmer nights, over a period of about, 7 to 10 days, say. We're starting with the tomatoes, and they're going to go in here. This here, I'm growing 3 different types. This one is a cherry type of tomato, just great for picking off fresh and popping straight in the mouth. I've also got a really chunky beefsteak tomato, that's also going outside. And then in the greenhouse, I'm going to have a variety called red pear, which is like a paste tomato, ideal for making sauces and so on. So I've already prepared this soil simply by adding about 1 inch or 3 centimetres, say, of compost, and that went on here much earlier in the winter actually. You could just plant straight into this, but just to give it the best of both worlds, I'm going to add a little bit of organic fertiliser. Now this is just bone meal, which has phosphorus. It's a good source of phosphorus, and that encourages root development, which at this kind of establishing phase in the life cycle is quite a worthwhile thing to add. So just adding a couple of small handfuls of that into this bed, and then I'll just lightly fork it in to get it incorporated. And this is quite slow release. Right, that'll do. And just lightly fork it in like that. And now to plant. This bed here is relatively small, so I'm only going to put 6 plants in here, which will give plenty of airflow between them. Ideally, you want to space them at least 18 to 20 inches. That's 45 to 50 centimetres apart in both directions. So let's just space the plants out now to see how they look in their positions, and then we'll plant them. You can see they really need to get out because it's beginning to bend over. Now these are all cordon or indeterminate vining types of tomato, which means they will need supports. There we go. Oh, I'm already getting excited just seeing them all spaced out here. It's so satisfying with that rich black earth. So to plant them, very straightforward. Going to make a nice deep hole and going to set them just a little bit deeper than they're at in their pots here. All the way along the stem has the potential to produce new roots. So by planting them a little bit deeper, you're going to encourage more roots to form, which will ultimately give a sturdier plant. But just remove the leaves, any leaves that will be buried, so you don't want to bury the leaves. In they go. There we are, it's the first one. Plant the rest. So they're planted and they're a good distance apart. Last year I planted them a little bit closer and I did get blight in the end. It comes on the air from elsewhere, but I don't think having them so close helped. So this spacing will really help avoid that to some extent. I've got a video coming up on tomato tips in a few weeks' time, so do stay tuned for that. So the next thing to do is simply to put in our stakes to offer them support. The sturdier the stakes, the better. This is nice and thick, and you want to ram it in next to the plant just far enough away so as not to spear the root ball, and just get it in a good foot or so, because it will get heavy with all the fruits, of course. And then once it's in, simply loosely tie it. I like natural twine, it's a bit more giving. Just quite loosely like that. And I will come round probably in a few days and tie them up again and keep on tying them up. Now these are cordon or vining tomatoes, so we just need to remove any of these side shoots in the armpits there between the leaf and the main stem. I'll just finish getting this lot planted and then I'll bring you back in once I'm done. To finish off the bed, I'm just going to plant some marigolds. Now marigolds help to do two things. They confuse pests by their strong smell, and they will also attract predators of pests. So they're well worth including. Well, actually there's a third thing. They just look pretty as well, don't they? So I'm going to pop them in between the tomatoes at the edges and in the middle, and they'll give a nice pretty display and make the vegetable garden look all the more attractive. I love companion plants like that. They serve a purpose and they lift the spirits as well. These were all started off from seed, and I'm really pleased with how much they've come on. Now, as far as caring for these tomatoes go, I'll keep them well watered in dry weather. We've had a nice wet spell, so I won't need to water for at least a week. And then when they start to flower, I will introduce a liquid tomato feed, an organic one, and that will encourage more flowers, of course, and give plants the resources they need to set their fruits. I've just finished planting my 2 beefsteak tomatoes. I've got them in the middle here of these 2 obelisks, which I'm going to use as a sort of tomato cage. I'm going to train them up and then have them sort of snaking around like that, which should create a real feature with the pretty yellow flowers and of course those big luxuriant juicy tomatoes. Lovely. Then for our tomatoes that will be growing in the greenhouse, I'm going to reuse these straw bales, which I used last year. They worked really well because they acted as a good buffer between waterings. They absorb the water and hang on to it, giving a nice consistent moisture at the roots. You can reuse them for a second year, obviously, if they've still got their shape. And by doing that, you don't need to condition them, which is something you have to do with fresh straw bales. Now, we've done a video on precisely that, and I will drop a link to that in the video description below. You can obviously put these straw bales outside and have them growing outside just fine as well. Once I finished last summer, I capped it with a bit of potting mix and just grew these winter lettuces, which have done really well. They've given a nice little crop, but I need to make room for these tomatoes now, so I'll take these out and they will give one last delicious salad later on after we've done our work. I'm doing something a little bit differently in here. I'm not using canes, I'm just going to use string, and this is a really tough string so it won't snap under the weight. I should be able to get 2 tomatoes to each straw bale here. So that's a total of 6 plants here, and I'm planting my paste tomatoes in here. So just secure it at the top, and then I'll feed the string through and then let it dangle down. And now we're going to plant our tomato. So I'll just cut it so there's a bit of slack at the bottom like that. Cut it about there. There we are. And let's get our tomato in. Show you what we're working with here. So you can see there's a few side shoots here, so I'm just going to pinch those off and actually get rid of the two lower leaves because they might be buried. And then it's already nicely loose from last year, in with our hand to scoop out a planting hole, and then in it goes a little bit deeper like that, and then just feed everything back around it. And then we've got two options here. We can tie the string loosely around the stem, which is what I'm going to do, or you can actually feed the string right underneath the root ball and bury it and hold it into place that way. I'm creating a little tie around the stem, and I'm keeping it nice and loose because obviously the stem of the tomato is going to grow thicker as it ages, so you need to leave enough room for that. Now, as it grows taller, I'll simply wind the stem around the string and that'll pull it down with the weight and get it a bit tauter, and I'll wind it up all the way around, and once it reaches the top, I'll just pinch out the growing point. Let's get the other 5 planted. These tomatoes will be treated in exactly the way as any other container tomato. They'll be watered as necessary, but they'll be fed at least twice a month using a tomato fertiliser. With our tomatoes planted, now it's the turn of the squash family. I've got 2 types of winter squash or pumpkin here. I've got a traditional orange variety, and I've got this one which I found in the garden centre just yesterday. I couldn't resist it. It's one of those ones with that lovely deep orange coloured flesh, and if you look closely, it's actually got 3 plants in it, so I've got 3 times the number of plants for my money. It's too good an opportunity to resist. But first, a little bit of soil prep. So I'm just going to put 2 in here, 1 there, 1 there. I've just fluffed it up a bit, but now I'm just going to add in a bit more compost. Squash will happily grow on top of a compost heap, so adding it in like this is just fine. Gives it a bit more oomph. And then, because it's very difficult to overfeed squash, I'm going to add a couple of handfuls, 1 for each planting position, of chicken manure pellets. There we are. And then just lightly fork those in as well. I'll plant these ones elsewhere. I'm going to separate these out and put 2 of these in here. They're really healthy plants. I'm so pleased with these. So, just in like that. Ideally, you want to plant members of the squash family, and that includes zucchini or courgettes, once nighttime temperatures are around 50 Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. I often push my luck with that because that's waiting till quite late in spring here. Now, the temperatures recently got down to the sort of mid-30s. That's about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, very close to freezing. But because it's only at that temperature for 1 or 2 hours at most, it really didn't affect the plants, and they've pulled through fine. Let's have a look at them, in fact. And here are my zucchini. These were planted about 3 weeks ago at the time of filming, and they've come on loads. The first flowers are in there now. They're very small, but another week or 2 and they'll be out in full bloom. Now, if you look here, you can see I've sunk these bottomless pots, and that's to make watering easier. I just fill it up and it drains through. But there is another way of trapping moisture, which I'm going to show you now with the squash we've just planted. The other way to trap moisture is to create a kind of levee around your plant by banking up soil to trap the moisture every time you water. Now, silly old me put this bed on a slope, so I'm going to have to make this levee here, closest to you, slightly taller so that it's level inside the levee structure. Every frustrated engineer's dream, this. But there we go. Try and make the walls relatively tall so that obviously they'll flatten out over time as you water, just so you don't have to bank up the soil quite so often. But there we go. That is our levee for that one, and I'll get on and do the next one. And now when we water, the levees trap the moisture and let it just drain through in its own time. This really makes the most of this precious resource, the water, so every drop gets down to those roots. The plants are quite young, so don't use a watering can without fitting a rose, or use the spray setting on the end of your hose pipe so you don't blast the soil out. One little tip for North American gardeners is to wrap the base of the stem in tin foil, and that way it makes it hard for the vine borer to get in and lay their eggs in the stem. Little tip for you there. Final thing before we move on from here is to plant a little row of chard at the back. There's enough room here, and we can never have enough leaves, can we? So let's just get those in quickly. The last thing to do is to drop these obelisks into place over the squash. These are climbing varieties of squash, so they'll climb up and create nice vertical interest in the garden. And if you're wondering what the plants are at the bottom, those are a climbing variety of nasturtium. They too will climb up, but they're quite delicate plants, so they won't interfere with the more robust squash. Last up in my lineup of squash family plants are cucumbers, and I'm planting two varieties. They're both climbers to go up here, and one of them, this one here, is a gherkin variety. I'm hoping for lots of beautiful little gherkins for pickling. That'd be delicious. Again, I'm just going in with a little scattering of chicken manure pellets, and then I'll just plant them against the canes. I've got some of these climbing nasturtiums up here again to go, and there's also a few borlotti beans planted too, so we'll have a mixture up here. So cucumbers are something like roughly 95% water, so there's quite a lot of water here, so it's really important to keep them hydrated, otherwise you'll get kind of crisping leaves, which isn't any good, and obviously the plants will have difficulty forming those quite moist fruits. Sometimes with squashes you find the leaves go a bit yellow when they've been in the pot for a while, and that's simply an indication that they're running out of nutrients, and you need to get on and plant them as soon as possible, really. Now, if you're worrying you've left it too late and you've missed the boat for this year, well don't. There are still lots and lots of plants available in nurseries and garden centres, and it's still not too late just to actually sow, especially in kind of warmer climates. Just pop 2 seeds in where they're going to grow and then water them, and once they're up, just thin to leave the strongest. I was hoping to save planting out the beans until now, but they got so long I had to get on and plant them. So here they are. They were planted just 2 weeks ago, and they've already started finding their way up the supports. I've got these lovely runner beans behind me here, against here, and then these are French or fine beans, and they find their own way up the supports, but you can just help sort of twirl them in just to get them started, and once they do get started they'll wind their way up. These are really thirsty plants, so I'm going to keep on watering them, and of course the more you water them, the more they grow and the quicker you will get your beans to pick. They aren't too keen on very cold temperatures, but if they do get nipped by the frost, they often do recover. Let me show you all the companion plants around here as well. I've got nasturtiums at the front here, and we're going to sow some dill as well, because that's a great companion to beans, so let's do that. Sowing the dill couldn't be any simpler. It's only this little space here that I've got, so I'm just going to scatter a little pinch of seeds like that. That's enough there actually, and then just simply tickle them in, and then give it all a bit of a water to set them off into growth. You can also see by my right knee here these little guys poking up. These are poached eggplants, and they've got a really cheery flower, just like a poached egg, that attracts all sorts of good bugs. I can't wait to see their cheering blooms in flower. Once my beans and indeed all of my warm season crops have established a bit, I'll go in with the mulch. These zucchini are already at a good size, so I'm good to go already. I'm just using grass clippings here. They're just taken from my lawn and they've been left to dry out in the sun. I'm spreading them relatively thinly, just to give a bit of extra protection against the sun, to keep the moisture in the ground for a little bit longer and to keep the root zone nice and cool. Now, mulching is a nice thing to do in my climate, but if your climate is hot, then I'd say it's going to be an essential. Well, that's all of the summer staples planted. Time for a well-earned cuppa, I reckon. How is spring where you are? Has it been a bit late in starting, or maybe you're weeks ahead, you lucky thing? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, we've got more on growing all of the crops mentioned today and many more besides on our channel right here, so do have a root around and get ahead of the game as the weather picks up and growth picks up too. Now, next episode we're tackling that most infuriating of all the garden pests, the slug. What works and what doesn't? Well, you'll have to tune in next time to find out. It's been genuinely lovely having you along today. Thanks so much for your company. Please do subscribe, turn on notifications and drop this video a like on your way out. Happy gardening, and I will catch you next time.